Welcome. I'm Terry Kramer. I'm the faculty director of the Easton Technology Management Center here at UCLA Anderson. And I'd like to welcome you to this event, Technology for Good Cross-Campus Innovation Challenge. Now, we've got two objectives for the program tonight. The first is to let you know about the program parameters and objectives of what is our third annual Cross-Campus Innovation Challenge. Our second goal for tonight's program is to have a discussion with two industry luminaries regarding innovation opportunities and key success factors in two areas, healthcare and sustainability. Those are the two areas of focus for what will be our innovation challenge. Now, let me talk just a little bit about those two areas as a bit of context. First of all, to start out with healthcare. Healthcare in the US represents the largest sector in the largest economy in the world, but its benefits are far from evenly distributed. Improvements in affordability and access to care, together with better health outcomes and care delivery, represent critical challenges in achieving efficient, effective, and equitable care for all Americans. Second item is on sustainability. Again, some context. The world is now on track to exceed 3 degrees Fahrenheit of warming by the turn of the century, so in less than 80 years. The current pace of progress needs to improve dramatically for the world to limit the worst impacts of climate change. Now, while healthcare and sustainability may seem very, very different, they're actually very much tied. In a recent statement published by the New England Journal of Medicine, physicians were calling for the rapidly warming climate as the greatest threat to global public health and urged world leaders to cut heat-trapping emissions to avoid catastrophic harm to health that will be impossible to reverse. So with that context, let me share my screen, and I want to tell you a little bit about our Innovation Challenge. And our Innovation Challenge is one of the kind of marquee events that we've got at the Easton Center that is cross-campus to really start thinking about technology-based innovation that can address large societal needs. So in terms of the objectives of the Innovation Challenge, there are two of them. The first one is to take all of the great resources and talent that we have across campus at UCLA to identify innovation opportunities which affect notable societal areas of need. The second goal is the sustainability goal, is to create a set of learnings from this Innovation Challenge about technology-based innovation that can help future students and help future entrepreneurs. We're going to have two tracks this year for the Innovation Challenge. First one is on healthcare, and that is to create solutions that significantly improve accessibility, affordability, health outcomes, or care delivery in the US. On the sustainability front, the prompt that we have here is to create a sustainable solution that will improve water, energy, food, agriculture, transportation, and/or ecosystems. Now, as I mentioned, this is designed to be a cross-campus effort, so all UCLA students, fellows, and postdocs are eligible to participate, and all the teams have to have at least one MBA and one non-MBA. And as many of you know, the best areas of innovation are interdisciplinary in nature. So getting diverse teams are going to help hugely. In terms of the criteria that our judges will use in this Innovation Challenge, there are 4 of them. First one is impact. We're looking for large, transformative ideas that have both depth and breadth of value, both to the venture and to society. Second evaluation criteria is feasibility. So notwithstanding what I just said in the first about impact, you've got to identify areas of innovation that can be executed on. So that ability to identify how do you execute, what are the paths to execution, how do you think about metrics of success will be part of feasibility. Third area of evaluation is going to be on innovation itself. We're looking for original ideas, powerful ideas, and ideas that are differentiated in nature. And then the fourth and final criteria is persuasion. As all good leaders and entrepreneurs have to do, you've got to be persuasive with customers to try out new products and services, persuasive to investors to be able to raise capital, persuasive in thinking about public stakeholders, whether that be governments, regulated officials, community leaders, et cetera. So that ability to be persuasive in both written and oral form will be the fourth criteria. Now, in terms of the calendar that will lead up to the final Innovation Challenge presentations, in the fall, we'll have a series of events that the Easton Center will put on that will help prepare anybody who's thinking about entering the Innovation Challenge or people that have already decided to do that in a lot of the critical areas of need. So tonight's event is going to be the Kickoff event, which I hope you'll find from our two lead speakers here, a lot of ideas about where the biggest opportunities might be, where innovation might reside, and how you might win. Second area is a series of workshops, financial modeling workshops on October 13th, a product management workshop on November 2nd, a pitching workshop on November 3rd, and then a team formation workshop on November 17th. So all of these kind of preparatory workshops are literally going to be held in the next few weeks. And then when we enter the winter, there'll be team registration. Team registrations will open on January 3rd. The deadline will be on February 4th. And then literally just 2 weeks later, business plan submissions will be due on February 18th. We'll then have a series of judges review the business plans for announcements of finalists. That'll occur on March 18th. And then we'll have a series of industry advisory programs. So people from industry to help give advice to the teams that submit. And that'll occur from March 21st to April 15th. Main message on this is think of your ideas early because there's actually not that long a window to develop a business plan. We'll then in the spring have final round presentations from the finalist teams. Those will be held on April 22nd and April 29th. Winners will be announced a few days later. And then we'll do a debrief event where we'll share the types of ideas that came up and then the finalists, the winners that came up to benefit the broader UCLA community. So if you need more info on the Innovation Challenge, you'll see a variety of contacts here. Our website that provides more information, our Slack channel, and most importantly, Jamie Park. Jamie works in our Easton Center, and she is the program manager for the Innovation Challenge. So this, as I mentioned, is the third annual event. Jamie is very knowledgeable about all the ins and the outs and the deliverables and what success looks like, et cetera. So feel free to contact her. Her email address is listed there. Final point is I just want to thank our sponsors. And I want to thank our sponsors not just for providing financial support and other support to this, but the fact that we are growing a cross-campus set of relationships. As I mentioned at the outset, the real magic of this is to make this interdisciplinary. So we've got 4 sponsors here: UCLA Health, the Anderson School of Management with our Dean, Tony Bernardo, who has earmarked funds to support this, the UCLA Sustainable LA Grand Challenge, and then the Institute for Carbon Management. A thank you to all 4 of them for everything that they're doing. So let me now switch over here and share a few thoughts about our speaker. And our speaker, our moderator, is a terrific moderator who's a colleague of mine and has just done a lot of great things. She's Anderson's very own adjunct assistant professor, Gail Northrup. A little bit about her background. She's a consultant, she's a coach, she's an educator, she's a president of Northrop Nonprofit Consulting. She teaches social entrepreneurship, governance, and impact. at UCLA Anderson, and she helped launch Impact at Anderson, which is an initiative and a center at Anderson that's really responsible for coordinating all of our activities regarding impact at the school. She's also an adjunct professor at the University of Cape Town, the Graduate School of Business there. She works with the Bertha Center for Social Innovation and Entrepreneurship. She has co-founded and is a former associate director of Spark Health Africa, which is a nonprofit assisting governments in Africa to strengthen their healthcare systems and improve healthcare outcomes, including the elimination of mother-to-child transmission of HIV. Her consulting firm has served numerous important and prestigious social impact organizations, including Human Rights Watch, the ACLU of Southern California, Liberty Hill Foundation, Homeboy Industries, and more. She received her MBA from UCLA Anderson and her bachelor's degree from Stanford, serves on a number of boards, including the Pediatric and Adolescent AIDS Treatment for Africa, Spark Health Africa, and UCLA's Global Lab for Research in Action. So let me just take a moment again and just say a huge thank you to Gail and turn it over to you.
Thank you, Terry, and welcome to everybody for joining us today. We're really excited about this event and the challenge, and I'm excited to spend some time with our two panelists that you'll get to know over the course of the next hour. And I'm excited to be in conversation with Harlan Levine and Matt Kozlov. So before that, I just want to talk a little bit about today's event and build on what Terry has just shared with you. Today's event really aims to highlight the key trends in leadership today, the transformative effects of technology across all sectors, the imperative for interdisciplinary collaboration, and the critical need for businesses of all types to be serving society. It's an important leadership call to action to deeply understand some of society's greatest problems, to identify potential solutions, to resource organizations and initiatives appropriately, and ultimately to lead in a way that creates value for all stakeholders. Stakeholders, not just shareholders. Stakeholders including customers, employees, society, and even the environment. So today's event will also be an opportunity to exemplify the spirit of collective effort, which is essential to success. An invaluable partnership between the Anderson School and the greater UCLA campus are many students, faculty, and alumni who are committed to innovation and advancements in healthcare and sustainability. And most importantly, also to be looking at our partnership with the broader community as we seek to listen to learn from, and to engage people who are experiencing the challenges that we're seeking to solve through the Innovation Challenge. So we're very fortunate to have our two panelists with us today, Harlan Levine and Matt Kozlov. First, a little bit about their backgrounds. Harlan is the president of strategy and business ventures at City of Hope, where he's responsible for strategy, innovation, and growth, drug commercialization, payer strategies, and the Center for Internal Medicine. Prior to City of Hope, Harlan held executive roles at United Health Group, Towers Watson, and Anthem Inc. He serves on the board as the board chair of Access Hope, City of Hope's wholly owned subsidiary focused on serving the employer market and making leading edge cancer care available to all, regardless of geography.
Thanks, Gail.
Yeah, I have a little more about you, Harlan. A little bit more to highlight. He serves as a board member for Active Life Scientific Bioscience LA and Keck Graduate Institute Board of Trustees. He received his BA from Harvard College and his MD from UCSF. Welcome to Harlan.
Great to be here, Gail. Thank you.
Thanks. And Matt Kozlov, he has worked across a variety of industries: entertainment, mobile gaming, cybersecurity, healthcare, aerospace. He's currently the managing director of Techstars LA. Many of you are probably familiar with Techstars, one of the top venture accelerators in the country. He was the founding managing director of the Cedars-Sinai Healthcare Accelerator in partnership with Techstars, and the founding managing director of Techstars Space Accelerator. Prior to joining Techstars, Matt was head of corporate development at Telesign, a leading anti-fraud firm and one of LA's fastest growing tech companies. He's also worked at Sony Music Entertainment as the VP of Web and Mobile Products, at Yahoo in corporate strategy and product development, and at Bain and Company. Matt has a BA in economics, also from Harvard. And welcome to Matt.
Thanks, Gail.
Sure. So about today's format for the session, I'm going to be asking Harlan and Matt a series of questions to hear some of their insights and reflections and recommendations, and really tap into their expertise of sitting at the intersection of technology, innovation, healthcare, and sustainability. Then we're going to use Slido for moderated Q&A. So the Slido event code will be put in the chat. It's Innovation21. I'll remind you of that later on. But first, let's just jump into conversation with Harlan and Matt. I've got a couple of questions. I'm going to start with you, Matt. You have had extensive experience as an investor and as a mentor to a lot of different companies that have gone through various accelerators that you've been involved in. You've invested in over 60 rapidly growing tech companies directly. Can you just tell us a little bit about the breadth of Techstar LA's focus? What are some of the themes you're seeing in terms of areas of innovation? And we'd be interested to hear what you personally think. What are some of the key elements to successful innovation?
Quite a few questions there, so I'll try to remember them all. At Techstars LA, we are a generalist program, so we're investing in the best companies that apply to our program regardless of industry. However, we try to invest in sectors where our mentor pool, as well as the corporate and nonprofit landscape in LA, can best support the companies we decide to invest in. And so in LA, that means we've made healthcare a very strong focus. We have some of the leading academic health systems in the world. In our backyard, we have some of the best pharmaceutical companies in our backyard. And so healthcare has always been a very strong focus for us. I think we've invested in at least 40 to 50 health tech companies through our LA programs, and that's just to date. But we're also investing in property tech, e-commerce and retail related technologies. We are investing in sustainability related technologies, a lot of aerospace and defense related companies as well, given the cluster of aerospace and defense corporate, civil, and military organizations in our backyard. But we are trying to really invest in the best companies that we see. We're investing in about 25 companies a year at this point across a variety of industries. And I forgot what your second question was already. I'm sorry.
No, it's good. I mean, that's a good breadth of all the different investments that you've made, and obviously touches on your unique vantage point being here in LA. What are some of the trends that you're seeing or themes across some of the investments that you're either considering or that you're actually moving forward in your process?
We are, when assessing the companies we decide to invest in, the number one attribute we're looking at is the quality of the team. And we assess the team across a variety of dimensions, but number one, we're looking for founder market fit. Is this a founder that really understands and is passionate about the problem they're solving, not just the technology that they're building? We want to see that they're obsessive about solving a particular pain point in the market that they understand and have a particular passion for, because as anybody who's ever been an entrepreneur knows, it's really hard, and that passion's got to be the thing that gets them through those dark nights. We also want to see some traction and ability to execute. So in terms of how we invest as a firm, we are aggressively evaluating the quality of the team. And just speaking around trends, I mean, we could pick apart different industries and different trends, and we'll probably spend a lot of time talking about trends in healthcare. I can say that macroeconomically right now, the venture market is very hot. There's a lot of access to capital. Valuations are higher than I've ever seen them. There's more money flowing through the system than I've ever seen before. There are IPOs that are becoming great sources of liquidity that then trickle down and funnel the next source of growth for founders who then are looking to access capital from that. And so it's creating a very virtuous cycle right now, which is really exciting. I've been in tech for a long time. I don't think I've ever seen it this enthusiastic is the best word I guess I could use.
Well, good. I love one of your key points there, Matt. And I've heard it before, particularly when it comes to social innovation, which is falling in love with the problem, not your solution, and being married to that problem through all the iterations that it takes. And that's what we see in terms of successful entrepreneurs, is that grit and resilience when they're hit with different challenges, to stay connected to the problem they're trying to solve. And I think that's really relevant for those that are looking at the innovation challenge. So Matt, you've worked across a broad range of industries, and both in deep tech and healthcare. And I had to actually look up deep tech to make sure I knew what that meant. I thought I knew it, but so for those of you that might not be familiar with that term, it's a type of organization, but most often a type of startup that focuses on tech solutions based on significant scientific or engineering challenges. Is that about right?
That's about right. If you've got at least one PhD on the founding team, you're probably a deep tech company. If you're going through FDA approvals, you might be a deep tech company. If you're putting something into outer space or working in the semiconductor industry, you're probably a deep tech company. And capital requirements are probably different, but on the flip side, grant opportunities are a significant opportunity. So we've spent a lot of time finding great founders who are solving really hard problems that there may be a significant moat around, but if they are able to cross that chasm, not only is it going to make a huge marker on the world, but there's probably going to be a big financial opportunity on the other end as well.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit more about some of the greatest, if you see there are certain segments or subsectors within the healthcare industry that have great opportunities for technology innovation or technology solutions.
So I have focused all of my healthcare investments to date on software and class 1 and class 2 medical devices. So I bet Harlan will actually be able to speak to some of the more advanced deep tech developments in precision medicine, genetic modifications, CRISPR, Cas9 type stuff that I can only begin to understand given my understanding of scientific state of the art. However, there are some pretty incredible developments in hardware and software that are enabling new business models and new paradigms of care that I've been fortunate enough to work with. And one company that I get very excited about is a company called Tasso. Tasso is a company that's spun out of University of Wisconsin, group of PhDs with some grant funding from DARPA as well as from the university, built a device that can sit on your upper arm without any phlebotomist. They can use microfluidics to extract enough whole blood to be able to run a pretty wide array of diagnostic tests. And as any of you who are following the whole Theranos scandal, it's really hard to actually extract and preserve the integrity of whole blood. And Theranos was not able to do it. They said they could do it, but they were actually destroying the sample in the process of collecting it. But Tasso has figured out how to do that. And they've created an end-to-end blood analysis capability that does not require a phlebotomist or a trip to the lab, which to me is so exciting for a number of reasons. One is it enables clinical trials at the edge. No longer do you have to get a patient into a doctor's office on a regular basis to collect blood, which is usually something that needs to happen quite often as part of a clinical trial. So you can democratize access to clinical trials. Pediatric applications become really exciting. I don't know if any of you are parents who have ever had to, unfortunately, get quantities of blood from your young children. It's not pleasant, and to take some of the pain and scariness away from blood draw is very comforting. Military, there are enormous applications. You can take an entire naval ship's worth of blood samples on a regular basis using this technology. You can create the ability to put labs in safe places and get the blood drawn in more contentious areas. But frankly, the amount of data that's available to us in blood is enormous. And so what the spit test did for genetics, imagine the amount of data that you can extract from blood and being able to get that on a regular basis. And so that's a company that doesn't, you can't just put that to market in a year and hope it takes off. It's something that requires a lot of science, a lot of clinical trials, a lot of nuanced understanding of the market, and that company has been very effective. I could name a whole bunch more if it would be of interest, but
give us one more example, maybe.
One more that might not seem as deep tech, but they've been rigorously collecting evidence for years to demonstrate the efficacy of their digital therapeutic. Is a company we invested in called Applied VR, actually here in Los Angeles. And they are using virtual reality to manage stress, pain, and anxiety before, during, and after surgeries, as well as to manage chronic conditions, reduce opioid dependencies. They are rolling this out in OBGs, and actually people are giving birth with these on. And it is wildly fascinating to me how effective virtual reality can be in hijacking the brain into tricking you into you're somewhere else, experiencing somewhere else. And they did submit and receive breakthrough designation earlier this year from the FDA, which opens a lot of commercial opportunities for them. They've raised about $30 million so far. And it's a technology that really was in infancy 20, 30 years ago, 10 years ago, and only recently in the last few years has gotten to a state where it's real enough and compelling enough that it can have clinical efficacy. And there have been a lot of trials, and I've been really impressed to see the results of not just on an individual patient basis, but across the longitude.
Great examples. I think of some of the underlying challenges that you're speaking to in terms of these tech solutions have to do with challenges in, as you say, democratizing access, whether that's to clinical trials or to effective diagnostics. I'd love to turn it to you now, Harlan, and ask kind of the similar question. What do you see as some of the greatest challenges, healthcare challenges, that either haven't been addressed yet, or areas where you see great potential for technology in the healthcare space?
Sure, happy to jump in on that. I just want to touch on something Matt said about the applied virtual reality, because I saw the company years ago, and they clearly have made a lot of progress. But this is going to be a common theme that I'm going to talk about today. It's what Matt was talking about was the really cool stuff, which is while you're having the procedure, you can separate yourself from the procedure and really think you're somewhere else. But its initial impact on people is just asking people, what gives you anxiety about these things? And it's the unknown. So what that company and others can also do is take you through the experience that you would otherwise have no way of knowing what it's like to walk into a hospital, walk into a procedure room, whether it's getting pain management with a needle in your back or radiation therapy. It takes the mystery out of it. And that's really, when you talk to human beings, that's what they want. They want the known as opposed to the unknown, because most people can handle the known. So the theme is, and I'm picking up something Terry said about wanting original ideas. It's also original ideas and how you apply them in original ways. And I hope we can hit on that a few times during the evening today. To answer your question, healthcare is so broad, and we have such amazing acceleration of data and technology and capabilities and understanding the genome and problems across the country. And as COVID is pointing out, which we already should have known, global health care issues. There really is no single answer to what are the biggest issues. Things are getting addressed, but I think with the new technology and data, I'm going to talk about things that are being under-attended to, or there's huge opportunities still ahead. So I'll start with, in fact, Matt kind of outlined my, where I should go, and I'm going to follow that lead for a while. The opportunities are so big with a new understanding of the human genome. This is something that has advanced immensely in 20 years, and it's not just understanding DNA; it's the volume of data that's being generated from that is going to lead to immense opportunities, like in new drugs, gene therapies. But we'll talk a little bit later about the impact it can have on what we do today as well. So I say the human genome is there's a ton of interest going into it. There's more money going into that than I've seen. Even if I go back maybe 5 to 6 years, I think you can add a zero onto the valuation of some of these companies that are very early stage. So there's huge opportunity with human genome. The second area that I think there's huge opportunity is addressing areas in healthcare that are lacking data and analytics today, and applying the new capabilities we have in high-speed computing and the better analytics that we have in really addressing problems that we've never been able to address before. So I'll try to keep it simple. Can we take a population of people and better predict who's going to get sick and what they're going to get sick from so we can mitigate it? We do that already with less sophisticated ways for things like heart failure. We're trying to predict which diabetics will become more serious over a short period of time. But think about the current problems we have now with the COVID pandemic. If we could tell who was going to present in the ER and was safe to go home and who had to go in the hospital, think about the impact it would have in capacity in the hospital that we have. And there's so many other examples of better and more efficient use of the resources we have. If we can predict short-term complications like who's going to get septic or just who's going to get sick in the long term. Maybe we'll touch on it later today. We can now predict or identify people who have cancer just at the beginning stages before they have any manifestations, and think about the opportunities to intervene there. I do think one of the really underattended opportunities is to understand how do we improve access to healthcare across the world? How do we drive more equity and affordability? And improving really the health of our population. And quite frankly, when we can do that in the United States, how do we do that and take it on globally? And I'm not suggesting that's the sequence and a priority, but I think we have such opportunities to learn here how to improve access and how to understand the social determinants of health and what really limits people from getting the care that they need. There's cultural barriers, but there's really just distance to food. There's distance to access. I hope to have some time to talk about behavioral health at some point. We have to disrupt the way we go about these things. I'll plant the seed on behavioral health right now, which is, I heard this in NPR years ago. In Zimbabwe, they had, I think, about 15 million people in a community with 15 psychiatrists. And they needed to do something they have stress just like we have stress. And someone came up with the idea and said, who's one of the most trusted individuals in the culture? And it was the grandparent. So they actually trained grandmothers to do some basic behavioral health stability interventions and listening. And they put them on bus stops across the key areas in Zimbabwe. And you can't imagine the utilization that these people, that those grandmothers had, and the impact it had. And it became the social norm, by the way, to stop by and do one of those bus stop visits to a grandmother. People just need to be heard. They need simple tools. And without technology, they were able to solve a problem by reinventing the role and thinking about what was really needed. Now imagine if you can apply technology to that, how you can magnify the impact of having those new trained roles now be accessible to everyone, even people that can't afford to get into the city, to get to the bus stop. We need to think creatively like that. And those are the opportunities that I think are underattended at the current time.
Such a great example, Harlan. It reminds me of my work in Africa around mother-to-child transmission of HIV and the use of a new cadre of workers, which I think has been one of the most impactful social innovations around HIV is the idea of HIV-positive mothers walking alongside those other mothers who are pregnant to make sure that they get tested, to make sure that they go on treatment, to make sure that they stay on treatment, and that their child receives treatment so they deliver HIV-free babies. And that was the social innovation that happened because of humans connecting with humans in a way that hadn't been formalized before and later became codified in the system, in the healthcare system.
Yeah, it takes so long to formalize that. And sometimes we get ahead on the technology and then we don't have either the regulatory environment, or we just have impediments because people don't want to change what they do today, whether it's the healthcare providers or the payers. They want to pay for what they pay for and they want to use the roles that they have. You think about all sorts of remote patient monitoring, and again, hope to hit on that. But the remote patient monitoring is good for solving the issues that we know today. But think about what you can do out of the home now if you have remote patient monitoring, but we have a shortage of nurses already. So how do we deal with that? Well, what if we think ahead of here's where it's going? Does it have to be a nurse that goes in and checks on the patient? We have, and not that I'm necessarily touting the success of it, but we have neighborhood watch programs. Why can't we have community health watch programs where we know people are going into the home to get their care, they're leaving the hospital sooner? Let's set up like a social network where either by phone, by video, by computer, or by visit, people will just, lay people with basic training can lay eyeballs on someone to make sure they're safe to get to the bathroom, to get food, to make sure their monitors are working. We just need to create a new network to support the technology. And I think your example is a really good one, but I think it's going to be explosive as we try to move more care into the home. We can't rely on the same roles of nurses, nurse practitioners, and PAs.
I think it's interesting you say that too, and I'll just connect it when we think of cross-campus collaboration. UCLA Anderson just this week launched a new program, a management training program for community health advocates, community health workers, and managers of community health workers, recognizing the power, particularly during COVID, of those folks that are on the front lines of healthcare delivery and their role in ensuring better access as well as better outcomes. So exciting to see that actually get launched this week.
Yeah, I think we have to do that because we have a shortage of the skilled people, and we have people working below, their training level. I hope we don't call it like defund the nurses at any point along the way. It's really enhancing the nurses, enhancing the doctors. And, we just got a grant or an earmark for a community van to go out in an underserved area. We're stepping back to say, how can we use technology to have as few possible of nurses and doctors in the vans and put new people that can address other community issues that, have been ignored, the social determinants of health, the cultural, the need to look like the community you're serving. So it is a combination of original ideas and technology that will solve many of our healthcare issues. The high tech stuff, we will always excel at. It's the fact that, I don't remember the number, but we're in the 40s or 50s in terms of our ranking in the Commonwealth Fund of healthcare systems. We have to do a better job of meeting that lower end of the underserved communities that we don't do today.
Well, let's build on that point. Talking about, you touched on, Harlan, both kind of unattended and maybe even overhyped technology solutions. I'm curious, Matt, if you have any examples or any points you'd like to share in terms of where you see gaps in terms of healthcare innovation, or areas that you think are being, overly touted, and really we have to go to simpler solutions with more creative execution, let's say.
From where I sit right now, but I just wanted to go revisit a point Harlan made because it reminded me of two companies in our portfolio, both addressing the elder care, nursing, caregiver shortage. One is a company we invested in called Helper Bees, and they are using, young college-age students and, recent grads to pay them to go help out elderly people in their neighborhood. And there's a similar company called Neighbor Force that's doing something relatively similar. And it doesn't require a lot of deep tech to do that. It's, there are people who want to be helpful and can be trained to be useful without necessarily needing the medical background. So I thought that was an interesting touch point on some trends we've been seeing. And sometimes the technology does not need to be, let me back up. I still think that we're really very much in the infancy of using technology to improve healthcare. Some people call it health 1.0, 2.0, 3.0. I don't know where we are exactly in the life cycle. But a lot of the systems that are still being used in day-to-day operations of health systems and interacting with patients are still very like old fashioned, like there are broken processes, there are outdated systems that look like they were developed in the late 90s, early 2000s, and don't really look like the patient experiences or consumer experiences you'd expect to have in 2021. And sometimes it can be as simple as using text messaging to communicate with patients around their upcoming visits. And something as simple as that can actually become a multi-billion-dollar business, because the status quo before that was using email or using the Epic or Cerner app and pushing a notification that the patient never sees. But guess what? The response rate on text message is nearly 100%. And so one of our companies, Well Health, saw that as an opportunity and has built a several hundred person company worth hundreds of millions of dollars based on creating a better patient communication experience. And so I think when the people who are on the call today are thinking around innovation challenges, think about it as a patient. Think about some of the things that there's a gap between your experience when you go to a restaurant or to a mechanic and when you go visit your doctor. And sometimes it's easier said than done. If you look at how artificial intelligence is being applied in certain sectors, and we're still very much in the infancy of using AI in healthcare. And that doesn't necessarily mean using computer vision to detect cancer tumors in radiology. It can be something as simple as looking at the text in your health record and helping the doctor create the note that they're going to spend half their time writing up. It can be helping find the clinical trial that you might qualify for, because in the past it was someone manually looking through all the requirements of all the different clinical trials and matching them up manually by hand. So there are lots of technologies. We mentioned virtual reality, and every year there's a whole new tech cycle that introduces new technologies, and then thinking through how can you apply them to healthcare, and again, think through what is the problem you're trying to solve, not just what is the technology you want to use. There's just enormous opportunity.
Harlan, tell us a little bit about some of the promising areas of innovation going on specifically at City of Hope. I know you have a lot of cutting edge innovations. Share with us a few of the ones that you get most excited about.
Yeah, let me, I'll jump in with some of the tech ones and then we'll get to some of the service stuff. So in technology, got to start with the human genome. We've done so much research in that area and with the data that's generated. Let me just tell you what it does. I mean, it allows you to take high risk cases and understand who has, what their prognosis is. So you could take two people with colon cancer and be able to help them plan their lives to tell them, which has the more aggressive case. As I mentioned earlier, you can identify cancer patients now by circulating DNA, not waiting for it to show up in an organ. Importantly, think about all the women that have surgery, had the breast cancer removed, and we're not sure if they have anything left in their body or not. And we have now testing for what we call minimal residual disease. And aside from learning how to treat that over time, think about the comfort it can give people, families, to know that it appears that they don't have residual disease left. We also can use a person's DNA. We can reprogram a person's T cells and by reprogramming their DNA, so it actually attacks cancer cells and only cancer cells. So it has less damage to surrounding tissue or any other tissue. And also in many cases, particularly blood cancers, can give you sustained remissions. And we're building off of that. And those are called CAR T cells. And next up are going to be NK cells and then BiTEs. And what's nice about that is they get more specific, but also safer over time. And you can use them as an outpatient and hopefully in a clinic, and then people can go home and not have to be hospitalized. The next step beyond that will be what everyone hears about is gene therapy and regenerative medicine. And I won't go deep in that, but in regenerative medicine, we basically take stem cells that are the cells that are undifferentiated when you're born, and they become all your different organs, but we can now reprogram them. So if you need to replace heart fibers for heart failure or something in the spinal cord, you can, the hope is to be able to restore function that we haven't been able to do so far. We already have treatments for blindness. And the field will continue to evolve. It's going to get expensive, but then the price will come down. So we'll have to figure that out as a society. A little bit less scientific. I talked about monitoring already. Think about what that allows people to do is get out of the hospital sooner. It's safer to be at home. You have what we call nosocomial infections, where you get infected by the bacteria in the hospital. It's highly resistant. So you're improving health, but also you're improving affordability and safety. And then robotic surgery. We, City of Hope, did not invent robotic surgery, but we were one of the first systems to embrace it. In fact, I think we had the highest volume in the world for a while before we started educating others in the area. But you can get at things that you couldn't get at before. Prostate cancer is one where it came to be, and less bleeding and we think less side effects and cutting nerves and things. But in metastatic liver cancer, we can take out 8 or 9 metastases in the liver that would come from the colon. Where up until doing that, it was a death sentence to have colon cancer spread to the liver. And now you have not a prolongation of life, but a cure in 35 to 40% of patients. So it's really remarkable what we can do, both with technology, remote monitoring, and then the human genome and the data that comes from there. I want to just kind of stay on that theme of creativity, of someone else's idea. I remember as a kid, I'm going to say a really young kid, but I think I may have been in college. There was an article in the LA Times about Dolly the sheep. And if you're old enough to remember that, you're my age, or at least, you're my age or close. But
I think I was in the 4th grade when that happened.
I was not in the 4th grade.
Matt, this was really friendly conversation to this comment.
Exactly.
I'm going to say you were still spitting up at that age, but we'll move on from there. But one of the scientists at City of Hope saw that, and he said, well, if you take DNA and put it in an egg and make a clone of a sheep called Dolly, why can't I take DNA that makes human insulin, put it in a bacteria that can make human insulin at scale? So up until then, people were always taking animal insulin, and he basically took an idea that was used for fun for a sheep and put it to good use to solve a problem that he identified. And with that intellectual property, we licensed it to Genentech. And 2 things happened. One was human insulin came to be. And the second thing was 41 years ago, maybe closer to 42, the entire biotech industry was born out of that license and out of Genentech's vision and this doctor's ingenuity to take something that people were using for other reasons and bring it to human benefit. So, and the human benefit is people had allergic responses to the animal stuff, and it didn't work. And it was hard to grow to scale. So we met a need, we improved lives. And it's the point of taking other people's original ideas and being able to apply them in new original ways that lead to real disruption, because you're thinking about the problem you're trying to solve, not just the science. You got to do both. And I don't want to discredit our scientist. He actually was on the forefront of creating the cloning technology as well, but it was how he used it. And I should add, by the way, he's still there 42 years later, and decades later, he actually was part of the team that he was part of a team that did the insulin too, but part of the team that developed the pathway for monoclonal antibodies. So diabetes to cancer, another blockbuster for Genentech. And you may not know what monoclonal antibodies are, but if you've had cancer, you know what Avastin, Herceptin, and Rituxan are. And those are, up until even today, those are 3 of the most popular, most important drugs in our regimen. So looking at the world differently, applying other people's knowledge is you talked about collaboration in the opening. It's really about collaboration and working together to solve big problems.
I love that example, Harlan. It reminds me, when you talk about disruption, it reminds me of the definition of catalytic disruption or catalytic innovation or disruptive innovation being finding a good enough solution to a problem that in the end makes society more just and more equitable. So it's not always the most cutting edge, although scientific discoveries are critical to the process. But sometimes it is finding a new application of an existing innovation that increases quality, accessibility, affordability, and ultimately quality of care and quality of life.
Yeah, I mean, this is not exactly the example you're saying, but mRNA is not new. It's been around for 30 years. A lot of work went into a lot of money, but its time finally came, and it really helped lessen what could have been a tremendous disaster for the globe.
Yeah. Matt, did you want to add any examples where you've seen some kind of disruptive innovation or these areas of new applications of existing solutions to different problems or different contexts?
Yeah, I mean, going back to my earlier comment around new technologies opening the door for new platforms, I mean, the shift from on-prem to the cloud with AWS has enabled thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of startups to roll out technologies that never could have existed without it. Twilio, moving the telephonic stack from this impenetrable, hard to create experiences on platform to now any developer in the world can create a text message campaign or a video telehealth kind of experience has changed the world. Obviously the iPhone has probably brought more access to technology and access to care, frankly, than any device that's ever come before it. So it's all evolutionary, but with each evolution comes, a trickle down of hundreds or thousands of more. We talked a little bit about mental health and around destigmatizing it in Zimbabwe. And one of the things that gets me really excited is the recent merger between Ginger and Headspace. Headspace has been bringing mindfulness to the masses for years in a very media-friendly, accessible way where there's absolutely no stigma. I mean, it levels you, it brings you into the moment, it makes you healthier. And Headspace has been trying to bring access to mental health to people through a delightful mobile app that puts help at one click away. And I think together they can destigmatize and give people better access to maintenance level checkups to keep us like the folks in Zimbabwe, because we have a shortage of clinical therapists as well. And so what can we do to create better practices for behavioral health? And so I love that technology and slight business model disruptions can actually lead to better healthcare outcomes for hundreds of millions of people. And I do hope that technology enables a shift away from dealing with acute chronic care and moves it more towards the preventative primary care model, because we have been terrible at that, and people usually wait until it's too late to get the help they need. And so I hope that startups will be part of that transition, and that business models will follow suit.
Nice. Harlan, did you want to talk a little bit about behavioral health and how some examples or opportunities you see for innovation there?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's just an area for an area for disruption, and I'll focus on again the ingenuity of it, but it's also stepping back and asking yourself what's not working and why isn't it working, and how can we look at it from the person point of view. So as I look at behavioral health, think about, in addition to the stigma, if you want to get help, you got to find a provider. And it's not a well-kept secret that provider networks are really poor in health plans. And even if they technically meet the network adequacy regulations, think about what you have to do. You have to get an appointment. You don't know the person. Got to go in person. Got to drive. Got to leave work. Got to park. Got to go in that waiting room and think about which button do I push, and what if someone else walks in? Am I going to get seen here? And if it's close to my office, am I going to see someone from work? If it's close to my home, am I going to see someone I know? and then you have your meeting, and then you get the stress of missing your work, and you go back. There's no matching of whether that's the right person. Now think about it from a mom's point of view. You got a kid that needs an adolescent therapist. Good luck finding one. And by the way, they only meet during school hours. So you got to now take the kid out of school. So here's a system that doesn't work. And yet we perpetuate it because it works for a few. It works for the, so, this idea of destigmatizing it, simple apps, but also just thinking, why does it have to be in person? Most, the newer generation is perfectly happy doing something through video. And if you're not, let them go in person, but give people options. By the way, there's no data that 50 minutes is the right amount of time. So you have to pay for a 50-minute visit, where maybe your life is better if you can sneak in a couple 20-minute visits during a busy day. So, we need to be, think about from the person point of view, look at the data, and stop doing something because we've done it that way before. And that's what disruption, and that's, I tell that story in detail because I want people to think about the innovation challenge, to think about in detail what's not working today and how can we fix it. Matt was talking about the user experience and, kind of technical stuff. I'm at the level of, why do you have to check in? Like, if you've been to a hospital or a clinic more than once, they should be able to recognize you as you go through the kiosk. That should be your check-in. You should be told where to park. And then when you show up, there really doesn't need to be a waiting room for you because you've already checked in. I love it when I walk into these really fancy hospitals across the world, and I see the first thing is line up here. What sort of consumer message is that? I mean, so we really need to question everything in the system and see if we can reinvent it in an appropriate way. And I'm not saying blow it up. I think, blowing up the system actually has unintended consequences. And as most things will affect the underserved more, I think we just need to solve problems, look at it from the people's point of view, and start with the fact that we have inequities in care, we have inconvenience in care, and let's figure out how to address those one by one, and then create a new ecosystem over time.
Harlan, you that was very eloquently put, and I think there's one level additional that we can put on that, which is that not all communities need the same thing. The trans community, when they deal with mental health support, they might need a different kind of provider. An African American patient may need somebody who's culturally sensitive to their upbringing and backgrounds. Like someone who's an immigrant who recently moved here is probably going to have different requirements. And so we have to layer all of those challenges against the communities that patients are coming from, and there's a lot to fix.
Yeah.
Well, I want to go ahead, Gail. I'm sorry.
Well, I only have to take us on to briefly onto environmental sustainability for just a minute, as well as open up see if there's questions in Slido. But what would you like to add? Did you want to add something, Harlan?
Well, I was just going to, I was talking about the matching, and earlier, which is what Matt's getting to in detail. I think, if you started with the data, and we'll get to therapy in a second, but if you start with the data, the chances of dying of prostate cancer are 111% higher in Black men than white men. The chances of dying in breast cancer are 36% higher in Black women than white women. The system's not working. There's data to suggest that people feel more comfortable getting care if they look like them and understand their culture. So we should be developing, instead of relying on, can we hire someone into this community, and waiting for the old-fashioned way of doing staffing, can we use technology to allow people to find their match, where they're more likely to get screening, they're more likely to get early intervention? You got to start with the problem that you're trying to solve, and then all of a sudden it becomes an act of passion, as opposed to an act of technology application. And I think that's what we lack sometimes. We kind of look at it like, how can we make this claim go by and get paid more cheaply, which is important, by the way.
Yeah.
But we really got to start with what are the people and societal problems we're trying to solve. So I just wanted to add that because Matt kind of prompted that thought in my head.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's relevant very specifically to the Innovation Challenge and how students put together teams that have a cross section of skill sets and optimally experiences, and how others can be engaged in that. So I do want to talk for a few minutes about the sustainability component of the Innovation Challenge. And as folks may know, I mean, sustainability, and this comes up a lot in my class, it means a lot of different things, right? It can mean organizational sustainability. That's what funders are often asking nonprofit grantees to talk about their sustainability. There's financial sustainability in terms of just business model, but we want to focus a bit today on the environmental sustainability component of the Innovation Challenge. And I know, Matt, you have some experience in this area and some companies in your portfolio. I think of an example that sits at the intersection of the environment, technology, and innovation. There's a company in Morocco called Cloudfisher. And basically what they do is they're harvesting the clouds. They use nets to capture fog and to put it into, that's coming off of the Atlantic Ocean. And they're condensing it into water and pushing it through a filtration system and then piping it into these very dry villages and communities so that they can both have potable water, but also to irrigate their lands. So Cloudfisher, for-profit technology company. And there's many, many other examples. So Matt, tell us a little bit from your experience. What are some examples of the environmental innovation opportunities, either the challenges or some of the solutions you've seen?
So I'll caveat this all by saying that I'm absolutely no expert on sustainability, although I think we all need to educate ourselves on the state of the problem and what we can individually do to make our own impact, because it is an existential threat to each and every human being on this planet. At Techstars, we are very focused on sustainability across the firm. So I'm going to speak, not just at the Matt level, but right now at the Techstars level, we have 3 programs to date that are focused on sustainability. One is a program we run in the Nordics with Equinor, which used to be called Stat Oil, and then they rebranded as Equinor because they, even as a utility company, are very focused on sustainable energy. We run a program with the Alabama Power Company on the East Coast, which is, or in Alabama, which is focused on energy and novel approaches to reduce carbon emissions. And then we run a program with the Nature Conservancy as well, focused on sustainability, everything from preserving our oceans to climate impact. I'm going to take off my healthcare hat and put on my space hat for a moment. So I built a space program for Techstars a few years ago with the United States Air Force, NASA's Jet Propulsion Lab, Maxar Technologies, Lockheed Martin, et cetera. And a lot of the companies we were investing in were at the intersection of commercial, civil, military space, and climate change. One of the things that you need to be able to do if you're going to be able to measure climate change is sense the earth and understand where things might be going wrong, whether it's a drought that you can predict because you can take the temperature of every plant or humidity level of every plant on the earth. And that's a company that I invested in called Hydrosat, or you are building a sensing capability to detect gas leaks, methane leaks, toxic blooms that emerge due to global warming in a body of water. There's a company that we invested in called Pixel that is doing precisely that, using hyperspectral imagery. We invested in a company that's taking nuclear waste product, so a form of radioactive material called strontium-90, which is produced by nuclear energy reactors. We spend hundreds of millions of dollars trying to dispose of this material. By the way, nuclear energy, I'm a big proponent. It is probably one of the most cleanest and sustainable forms of energy we can create, and we should be absolutely investing significantly more. Obviously within highly regulated environments, but we should be investing significantly more in nuclear. But anyway, these guys can take that waste product and turn it into stable, scalable electric power for undersea, for remote terrestrial applications, for space. That's a company called Zeno. And so you're seeing a lot of really cutting edge technologies coming out of that aerospace and defense sector. And that's just what I can speak of. If you were to bring in some of the managing directors that are my peers and colleagues with, a much more terrestrial focus, you'll be able to hear a lot of incredible advancements around marketplaces for sustainable energy, companies that are sequestering CO2 and turning them into, industrial carpets and bringing market economic forces in line with our goals of reducing carbon emissions to prevent that increase in temperature, which could frankly kill us all. So it is horribly frightening, and there's a lot we should be doing to work on this. But it's probably beyond my expertise to go much further than that.
No, that perfect examples, and I think you pointed out a couple of things come to my mind. One is when you're talking about carbon emissions, that there's a lot of different opportunities for innovation. The question is, which part of the problem are you focusing on? I just think of the oil spill in Orange County. Like, that is the problem. What could be done differently from a technology, whether it's detection or response or education? If we really focus on what is that element of the environment and the environmental degradation and the climate crisis we're all facing that our student teams want to address in the innovation challenge, it's to focus on a problem, to, as I say in my class projects, apprentice with the problem, get to understand it better than anybody else, so that you can look at it in different ways and come up with creative solutions to mitigate the problem or apply solutions in different ways.
Gail, given that one of our sponsors is in carbon management, I just want to tie it to genetics as well. I think scientists agree that we are emitting like 18 gigatons more of CO2 per year than we can really handle. And plants are actually a big part of it. And one of the things we're trying to, not we, but people are trying to do, like at the Salk Institute, is how can you generate that carbon dioxide by keep it in the soil longer, so it has less effect on the environment. And they've identified 3 genes in the plants that can change the root structure to get a more massive and deeper root structure, so it'll go deeper into the soil and stay longer. So that's another way of applying genetics to actually change, and this isn't just some plants, it could be applied to large agricultural plants. And they actually believe that, several gigatons of carbon dioxide can be saved every year by having it go deeper in the soil. So it's all the stuff we're learning in genomics is going to tie back, just like Terry was saying, into the environment.
Great example. Wonderful. Let me invite participants that have any questions that they'd like to pose to our panelists to do so via Slido. The Slido code is Innovation21. I see a couple of questions there, and I might just ask Terry and Dorina to, if there are kind of innovation challenge questions that could be answered in the chat, please feel free to do that. If there are any questions that Matt and Harlan can address, please also add those via Slido. I will keep an eye on that. While I just ask another question, which is just to spend a little bit of time talking about trade-offs, if there are trade-offs when it comes to risk, return, risk and trade-offs when it comes to innovation. And just wondering if you think, is there a trade-off, kind of, this is a bit theoretical, between bigger, riskier opportunities for innovation that might be more difficult to be successful at versus smaller, less risky opportunities, but they actually might be more implementable, or if you go back to the criteria for the challenge, more feasible. Do either of you have a view on that kind of risk, return, risk trade-off question?
I mean, that's what we deal with as investors all the time. As motivated as I am to invest in companies that are going to have a positive impact on patient care, they have to make money. Like, they ultimately, if they run out of money, then the business goes away and so does our investment. So from the very beginning and through the life cycle of the company as an investor who's considering putting capital at play, you were constantly trading risk reward, and you need to believe that there's somebody who's going to pay for this. You need to believe that they're going to be able to get through all the regulatory hurdles, if there are any, to be able to get that to market. You need to believe that they're going to be able to sell this. And frankly, health systems have generally an 18-month sales cycle, unless they're really, really innovative and can bring that down. So I'd say, healthcare investors, for the most part, I think actually have a higher tolerance for risk because it's a harder business to get off the ground. But it can often be a much stickier revenue stream once you do get through that. Once you do get the CPT code after you get FDA approved and you get insurance to carry you, it's going to be harder to unseat you. If you can get into a bunch of health systems, it's unlikely they're going to rip and replace you. But you do have to believe that the founder has the grit to be able to get through all that and has a realistic expectation of capital requirements and how they're going to get there. And some of them have access to grant funding, which is great. Some of them have access to debt funding, which is great as well. But you need to believe that this company can fundraise and keep the lights on to get through all those hurdles.
Yeah, I think I'll answer that in a few ways. I mean, by definition, the bigger the risk, the less likely it's going to be feasible. And I guess I would say that both are important. I mean, we need to have the big ideas and we need to pursue those, and you have to be rational and have the same discipline to go after it, but you also need a couple singles and doubles to advance the world too. So I think there's value in both. So that's answer number one. Answer number two is, sometimes they build on each other. So sometimes you need some of the less risky things to actually open up ideas that then can lead to the bigger idea. So I think, again, they both have value. But as I think about the people sitting in this room trying to make a decision about either the innovation challenge or their life, I think what you do in general depends a little bit on your interests, your risk tolerance, your interest, and quite frankly, your skills. And then to some extent, at some point in your life is going to be what your personal commitments are and whether you can afford to take risk or not. I mean, you got to, not everyone becomes the entrepreneur and then lives this life where they don't have to live in the real world. Most of us have to still live in the real world and take care of family needs. So you need to weigh all that. But what I would say in terms of the challenge is, third way I would answer the question is, all of you in this room today clearly have talents. You're in UCLA, you have skill sets. They got you to UCLA. At some point, you should be very aspirational and go for the gusto, go for the big idea, something risky. And even if it fails, you will learn something along the way that will make you successful in your other endeavors. So the question I would ask you now is, you want to be strategic and try to win this, as Terry said earlier, but what better time to think big and go big and take on something risky, as long as it's feasible and as long as you have a business case, as Matt was talking about, that you can convince someone else that it's going to be successful. I think it's a great opportunity to go big right now and pick up skills. And even if this project fails, you will learn something that will help you in the next stages of your career, I guarantee you.
One thing, if I could just add, just from a seed stage investor's perspective, unless you have an incredible background and access to incredible capital, don't go in asking for $10 million off the bat, though. Like, you do need to get some traction and some credibility before you can make a big ask for a large amount of money. And so, getting that sort of first baby steps of momentum is going to be challenged for those big, massive ideas. And doing it under university, like with grant funding, is a phenomenal way to get something like that off the ground.
I mean, just to be practical on that, Matt, even in your second and third rounds of funding, you don't want to over invest and dilute. I mean, that's what I was talking, the business case has to be rational, and you want the money that you need to get to the next inflection point of value. So you need to be really thoughtful about how you take on money, and more is not always better, particularly if you're a founder. It can dilute you out much sooner than you need to. And also, whether you're going big, risky, or small, safe, you still have a method to this. I mean, you have to have a discipline. You got to stay on scope. You have to deliver. You have to be able to, think about the stage gates that you're going to go through. And Scope creep is always an issue because you get excited, and the more money you have, the more you might want to have your scope creep. The only thing I would say is stay disciplined and focused, but always pay attention to the market. Because if the market shifts and you're still focusing on the wrong problem, you may hit your milestone, but you still won't have what Matt was saying is something you can sell and make money on.
It's interesting, your comments. I don't know if you were taking a look at Slido and fitting in answers to some of their questions, but you've hit on a number of them actually. And one was talking about balancing risk with responsibility, especially given the negative attention that companies like Facebook and Theranos have been facing. I think we touched a little bit about that just now on risk and return, as well as a question about how should students approach problems and focus their energy at this stage in their career. So I think you hit that one. There was a question about healthcare providers are they receptive to new takes on old problems? And how would a small company even break into the healthcare system? Do either of you have insights or reflections on that?
Harlan works at one, so I'll let him go first, and then I'll give my perspective, having worked with a few others.
Yeah, I just have to comment on Theranos, by the way, because I think Gail, you talked about hype earlier when you were talking to Matt. I looked at Theranos after Walgreens went in. I was at Anthem and a decision maker on whether to invest in them or not, and we passed. And I think it's an example of just seeing through the hype. Couldn't see the labs, couldn't see the data. The stories were polished. I mean, all this. I know this is in retrospect, but we did pass. You've got to be critical, and as good as the narrative is, there's still basics and fundamentals. And let me tell you, everyone overhypes their products, or everyone overpromotes their products, and it's called growing into your vision. And every startup company does that. But there's limits to. There's some people that are just hyping, and others that are over promoting, and I think there's a difference. You got to distinguish between the two, and it's not always a bad thing, by the way. I mean, you get. I'm trying to think of examples really quick here, but there was a company we discussed at a UCLA Innovation Summit. I'm not going to use names, but it basically was the first company to do e-visits, electronic visits for doctors, but it was asynchronous. And it sold for a boatload of money. Investors made money. The founders made money. But the company that bought it, a Fortune 10 company, basically has replaced all of it and shut it down. And it was overhyped. But the question I would ask, was it really overhyped, or was it just a little bit ahead of its time? And you should give it credit for launching the telemedicine industry that is now flourishing. So, that I would consider a win, even though some company lost money on it, because it got you somewhere. Then there's some other products that just disappear. And those are the ones that are over promoted. I just wanted to kind of go down that path a little bit, that you have to really kind of separate the wheat from the chaff on these things. I'm going to have to ask, what was the actual question that you asked me? I do want to.
How receptive are health systems to working with startups? Yeah.
So let me start with a very basic example. If you are creating a pacemaker and you need to put it in surgically, your market now is based on whether a cardiologist who does not do surgery is going to recommend a surgical procedure to put in a pacemaker. And those did okay. But then when you all of a sudden created a pacemaker that the cardiologist could put in a procedure and make money in doing it, all of a sudden your receptivity went up, hugely. And those pacemakers are now the more common pacemakers that people use. So the lesson there, and that's not being negative on the cardiologist, the lesson is you have to think about your customer. It's not always the paying customer that you have to think about. You got to think about the channel. Are doctors resistant? Yeah, it's hard to learn things after med school. It's hard to learn things after training. So as an inventor, you actually have to think about your channel. You have to think about how you're going to overcome that resistance. But I have to say, we've seen tremendous amount of progress. And I think I'm going to get myself in trouble. I'll say the newer doctors coming out of medical centers are much more flexible to change, even after they're in practice, because they recognize that they grew up without an iPhone and now they're doing everything with an iPhone. They know that the world has to change. I will confess, and having led innovation at 3 companies, I shouldn't confess this. I spent 9 months with my partner discussing whether we should get a fax machine in our medical office when I practiced. I was one of those resistant doctors, but I think the generation's different now. So I think it's better, but you have to think about workflow and you have to think about the economics. I'll give you one more example and I turn over to Matt. These, what are they called? Targeted therapies like checkpoint inhibitors for cancer, highly effective. The data showing that they're better than standard chemotherapy, but they cost about $30,000 a vial, 20 to 30. Think about if you're an oncologist and I'm not a UCLA student, so I need to keep the math simple. Let's say you make $360,000 a year. Your take home is $30,000. You take a vial and the patient doesn't show up, the patient dies, has a side effect, can't take the vial, your cash flow is zero for that month. So do you intentionally not order that drug for the patient? No, but psychologically you're thinking, boy, I've used these other chemotherapy drugs that are $8,000, I make $4,000 on, and I know how the economics work. You just tend to not use the newer drug, and that happens. So you have to think about how do you create the ecosystem that makes it doable. And the first thing I would do is find an institution that will deliver that drug but not steal the patient and give the patient back to the doctor. So you have to solve real life problems. And then I think the doctors who want to do the right thing and you take away the economic pressure from them, they'll implement the drug. I know there's a very focused examples, but I'm trying to bring it to light that doctors are receptive. You just have to solve their problems.
Yeah, no, it's a great example. Matt, I'm going to cut you off and have a different question to you, because I want to be able for the group to hear both of your insights or suggestions specific to the Innovation Challenge and specific to putting together teams. We started the conversation, Matt, with that was the first thing you said you look for when you're investing is a solid team. So as we're giving some parting words to the folks that are attending today, what should they be thinking about? And I'll link that to the last question we just got on Slido, is kind of recommendations for skills or experiences. How can this Innovation Challenge be an opportunity for students to build their toolkit for their lifelong careers?
So I feel like my response to this is going to be maybe controversial, but it's something I believe in, which is I don't think you should start a company just to start a company. Like, don't become a CEO of a startup because it would be cool to be CEO of a startup. Like, that's the worst reason to start a company. My hope is that those going to this challenge, if they don't have an idea to hone in on, and I don't know enough about this challenge and how they're going to do customer discovery and how they're going to learn about the various complexities of the problems they're solving and who their customer is and get feedback from it. And by the way, this goes back to your earlier question, which is it's sometimes really hard to get the voice of the customer as a healthcare startup because doctors are busy. The chief innovation officer, chief technology officer of a hospital, he's not going to spend time with you going through the complexities of how to integrate with his Epic instance. Like, it's really, really hard, which is why a lot of healthcare companies don't make it past seed stage. That said, for those of you who are about to embark on this journey of going into customer discovery, do it with the technical co-founder. Like, if you can't actually build the thing you want to build, there's no point in doing this. And don't go outsource it to some dev shop in India, because that's not going to work. Unless you have deep experience in doing that and know the team you're going to work with, and it's the same as insourcing it, because it's going to be incredibly hard. Don't do this unless you're like fully excited about the problem you're solving. And maybe that's not what Terry wants me to be saying, but entrepreneurialism is not for the faint of heart. Like, you're going to have so many moments where you don't know if you're going to make any money off of this. You're going to be running out of money constantly. You're going to be, sleeping on couches, eating ramen. Like, this is not something you should do for the fun of it. This is something you should do because you are obsessed with the problem you want to solve. Oh,
that's great. And Harlan, your thoughts?
Well, so I absolutely agree that you have to love the problem and not get fixed on the solution. I'm going to differ from Matt slightly in that other than an accident this year where I actually started a company, but at a certain point in life, I had to acknowledge that I'm not this is the part I agree with Matt. I'm not the entrepreneur. Like I would not put my family on the line and work for no pay and all equity. I thought I had some good ideas, but the founders that are out there probably have better ideas than mine. But what I did find out in my life is that I'm a really good number two guy. I love to solve problems. I don't mind, making somebody else more successful. And I am just tenacious in that. So what I would say is you may not be the founder CEO, but you might like the thrill, or you might periodically want to take some risk. And, I ran I helped start Optum. I ran Anthem operations, and I think I had 8,000 people and $100 billion of revenue go through it. It's hard to get stuff done, even though like people will open the elevator for you when you walk into the building, which is like shocking to me. It's still a big organization. You work in a startup, you get stuff done. And as Matt and you have said, if you're passionate about it, and that's just a great place to be, even if you weren't the founder. So that's the thing I would say that's a little bit different. Be part of a team, be collaborative and figure out what your role can be to make something successful. I'm very, I always got like an A- in writing because I'm in grade school because I'm very concrete. I opening sentence, my 3 ideas and my conclusion. It actually works pretty well in business, by the way, but it didn't help me through college. But, I would say, if you're starting this challenge, think about what interests you after this conversation today. Is it the scientific? Is it the access? Is it cost? Is it data? Is it technology? Is it environment? You're not committing to it for life, but what felt good today? And then think about what problem do I want to solve? And Matt said something earlier that I don't want to lose. He said, think about it from the patient point of view. I'm going to pick up on that. Think about it from the customer point of view. It could be the patient. It could be the consumer before they become a patient. It could be the doctor. It could be the community. It could be society. But so pick your topic, pick your perspective, and then start thinking about what the problem you want to solve. And for me, it has to be something that's sustainable. I want something that I'm not into selling, getting out at, during a capitalization phase and making some money and moving on. Some people are, and that's okay. I like to stick it out to the end and see it, come to fruition. And then the last thing I would say, getting back to team, you may not be the leader of the team, but be really clear. You're not going to be funded or successful if you're not part of a great team. So, and Matt is not alone. You could have the best idea in the world. If you can't pull the right management team together, no one's going to give you money. So think about, do you have the right parts? Do you have the right combination of the skills as you're joining a team? Do you add value? Are you willing to go cross-functional? And then the most important thing, I think, in a startup in this environment, particularly post-COVID, where people are moving from job to job, is look people in the eye and make sure they're committed to get to the next level that they say they're going to get to. They don't have to be there at the end, because you may not need an engineer as you get to a certain point. You may need a different type of engineer. But for what you need, what's in the business case to your next inflection point, make sure that team's going to stay, because it is devastating to a startup to lose a key member of the team before you're ready to have that sort of transition.
Well, incredible, both of you. I think I've got a little bit of whiplash today. I've been nodding my head so much. Couldn't agree more with both of you with so many of your insightful points. I think you summarized your own and each other's key points very well, but I'm just going to conclude by thanking you and turn it to Terry, who will be able to pull out some of his key reflections. But what a great conversation. We really appreciate your support of this process, Matt and Harlan.
Thank you, Gail.
For having us.
Excellent. Let me just add to Gail. I mean, I've taken like 5 pages of notes here, and I find each of these sessions, I learn more and more. Let me share just a few of my own takeaways. And I think Gail just did an outstanding job of kind of drawing out these thoughts. Number one, at the broadest landscape level, there are big problems out there. Whether we talk about healthcare or sustainability, these are huge problems. They are often oriented around high costs, lack of access, lack of democratization. And so kind of thinking about that as being a helpful opportunity for an entrepreneur to identify opportunities. Another contextual item is what Matt had raised, that the venture market is good right now. Valuations are good. IPO market is good, that you've got kind of a backdrop on the capital markets that says if you got a good idea, the capital markets will be supportive. Third main point I took away is the range of solutions are everything from what I would call low tech to medium tech to heavy tech or deep tech, as Matt said earlier. Low tech can be how do you communicate with patients, as an example. There were examples here about Tasso, blood testing, applied VR for pain management that might be medium tech. And then Harlan talked about some heavier tech stuff. The human genome, the use of data to identify predictive elements of who's going to do well after a procedure or not, or be ripe for a disease or not. But remember, in all of these cases, and this aligns with the innovation challenge, these are still big problems, even if they're low tech. And I always kind of think about it, it's a rate times volume issue. Reminds me of my economics class. Either you're going to be dealing with lots of customers or lots of patients, et cetera, at low pricing, or a small number at high pricing, but you don't want to play with small market and small willingness to pay. That's a bad area to play in. So think about those opportunities overall. Couple last points I took away. The team matters, to Matt's point. That you've got to be passionate, you've got a good founder, a good set of founders, et cetera. The problem matters. So to Harlan's advice, stay focused on the problem, and the problem may be changing as time goes on, but focus on that. And to Matt's point, the fundamentals matter, right? And even Harlan's point on Theranos is make sure you're not doing something that's hype. That isn't going to go nowhere. Last point I'll just raise is one that Harlan raised overall. We are also an academic institution launching a entrepreneurship type opportunity. Don't forget the importance about learning. And I think when Harlan said, think big, you will learn by thinking big, I would really double and triple on that, because that will create the second objective of the innovation challenge, which is to create a set of learnings for the school, for our students, and for future entrepreneurs that will matter a huge amount. Let me just say a massive thank you. Number one, Gail, for eliciting a really good dialogue here, for Harlan and Matt, for both sharing your own personal experiences, but also extrapolating to helping us understand what's relevant for all of us, and to the 4 sponsors that we have across the entire UCLA community. You're making this stuff happen. A big thank you to all of you. Good luck. Hope you enter the Innovation Challenge, and we'll see you as we progress through it. Take care, you guys. Have a great evening.